Hello and welcome to this webinar. Today I'll be showing an interview with Carmen Wilson, who is an interior designer at SUHO, also experienced in compliance and energy performance, especially in Class 1 buildings. But she has a particular interest in materials and indoor health of buildings. So please enjoy this webinar. And if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and I'll answer them as we go. And then I'll say a quick goodbye at the end. So thank you very much for joining. Good morning, Carmen. Thank you for joining us this morning as we have a little bit of a chat to you about your experiences in your current role. It's been a pleasure working with you for the last, 4 years maybe, like if you count all the gaps in between for me with kids. But so you're a bit of a jack of all trades at SUHO. You are involved in quite a lot and facilitating quite a lot of different projects, as well as using your interiors experience and just coordination of people and sustainability objectives. So can you give us a bit of a background on your journey until now? So maybe where you grew up and study or major influences that led you into sustainability?
Yeah, sure, Ruth. So I grew up in Adelaide, and that was mainly in my childhood and teenage years was in Adelaide Hills in 2 different locations, and that was a really beautiful place to grow up. Misty mornings and beautiful gum trees, etc. And then I studied interior design at the University of South Australia, and that is now a housing development. So the university was at Underdale, so that's no longer there. And that was 4 years of really exciting times. And I guess my influences in terms of early memories of going into sustainability, I do have a vague recollection of doing some sort of camp or workshop in the Adelaide Hills again, with the architecture students, and the theme was or the slogan was "Touch the Earth Lightly," and that really resonated with me. I then also chose an elective subject to do, and that was urban ecology, which I think really, I guess when you're looking at interior design, you're looking at a sort of macro level, whereas the urban ecology was looking at the city and urban landscape and the buildings and how they all interact together and with the environment. And then following on from that, sort of at the end of university and before getting a job, I did some work experience with the lecturer that gave that subject, and they were working on an eco city, which they were trying to build on a block in the Adelaide CBD. In the end, I don't think that whole project went to fruition, but after sort of leaving Adelaide and then coming back many years later, there was part of that which did end up being built, which was Christie Walk. So that was pretty exciting to know that I worked on that project, and those sort of ideals eventually were built.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite a well-known project in Adelaide as well. It's done a lot in terms of sustainable education, so that would have been a wonderful experience. So beginning in the interiors after your study, was there much focus in your early career in the study and the health of the interiors that we see you quite commonly advocating for today?
Oh, to be honest, I think there wasn't so much focus on the healthy side, or sort of the influences I had, places where I worked. There was the more focus on being creative and looking, innovative and amazing, which is still really important. But I don't think that the health and thinking about that was so prevalent back then.
Yeah, I probably agree. 10 years ago, even although, it was really starting to hype up, I don't think it's anywhere near what it is now. As the industry is really starting to try to shift the architects and builders and all of that are all signing their climate emergency things as well. So hopefully we're on the forefront of that. I also recall there was a period at SUHO when you actually went overseas and did some small building for a small community. How do you think that experience also shaped your perception of what you think people should be living in?
Yes, so I went with a group of people from Sustainability House at SUHO. We went over to Nepal and assisted with an earth building project. This was after quite a long time, or a period after the earthquakes. So that was really an amazing experience, because we sort of travelled from the capital, sort of up, winding on this road, on a bus that kind of was a little bit precarious to get up to this little village, and that was just so basic. The village was really quite, you know, they really lived in much different situation to us, and we assisted in doing some earth bag building, looking to build a school. Mm-hmm. So I guess the influence on that was just because you were using the soil that was just off the site. It was just really being local and using the materials that you had around, and also really thinking what was fit for purpose for that site. So what was really important to them was that the building stand up in an earthquake. So it had been tried and tested. These earth bag buildings seemed, because they're so thick, they're really quite wide, if you call them bricks, but sort of massive bags of soil, they're quite maybe 400, but maybe even 600 millimetres thick walls. And so I think that was the influence. And also just that the structures were just so simple. They're just happy to have walls and a roof that protects them from the elements, and that's enough. And in that is a beautiful building anyway.
Mm. Yeah. How did you find the interiors of those sorts of places as well? Because if they're, you know, the priorities in terms of them being the client would be quite different than what we experience typically. Did you find that a lot of their buildings, like, they would adapt to different uses?
Yeah, I mean, particularly the building that I worked on, we didn't quite get to the interior by the time that I'd finished. We just sort of got the walls up, and then because it was sort of volunteer labour, the rest of it sort of came afterwards. But I think in terms of interior design, it's very simple. They're not really worried so much about the aesthetics. They just want a simple look. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether they would necessarily have the sort of compliance measures and sustainability frameworks in those countries that we would have. In terms of energy efficiency, I would think that the thick walls would be helpful for both the hot summers and the cold winters. But yeah, I guess the technology and the thinking, again, if you put that single glazed window in there, that's not going to be as helpful to the envelope. But definitely that thick wall works for both extremes, hot and cold.
And was there a level of involvement with the people that were there? Were they helping you at the same time?
That was quite interesting, because they would a lot of them in the village would come and sit around the edge and kind of watch us, but didn't seem to want to get involved. And then sort of a couple of days in, some of them would maybe help with some digging, etc. So they were very interested in it, but they weren't so sure about assisting. And I don't know whether that was just that they weren't keen, or whether it was just a bit unusual to them to have all these foreigners helping them out.
So I know that you're quite an active participant in networking events and you know, self-training as well, and you're also a Green Star associate as well. So where did you as a designer train yourself to get this knowledge? It's obviously built up over you know, the last decade or so. How did you get to that point? How would you recommend others that want to go into sustainability, maybe from a similar beginning that you've had? Where do they start? How do they increase their knowledge and experience?
Yeah. Well, I think that becoming members of those kind of organisations, or doing ASBN and Green Star, are definitely worth being part of, because they do build up your knowledge if that's, you know, not come from university studies, or you're not in an architectural practice or design practice that perhaps is moving in that direction. And what it does is it obviously is networking. You're meeting people of that have knowledge that you can talk to about it. There are also, those kind of organisations are at the forefront of emerging thinking. So you're always sort of knowing what the experts are thinking, or kind of where they're going next. So you can just, you know, whether it's being carbon neutral or you know, other things like that, it's worth being at those kind of events, and obviously listening to all the webinars and going to the workshops. Yeah.
So immersing yourself with all the change makers that, or people that are wanting to make that change as well.
Yes.
Not being afraid to ask questions and have that dialogue.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So you've had half a decade in a dedicated ESD advisory role at SUHO and modelling. Can you describe the importance to you on taking your accreditation to the next level, i.e. with the Green Star Associate and your experiences on Living Building Challenge, and why you have journeyed down this path in terms of your sustainability experience? It could have been quite easy just to sit in a role where you're just modelling, but you seem to be pushing the boundaries of what your learning is, and coordination and taking that next step.
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of the energy efficiency, that is something that we've got some rule or sort of ideals around, like passive design, which is really making the building, you know, if it's orientated correctly and it's got the right thermal envelope, then it's almost doing half the work anyway before applying technology like double glazing and solar panels and things like that. The actual building is already doing a lot of the work. So I guess I then started to think, trying to think about the whole building, and that as well as the energy efficiency, we need to be thinking about the materials that are going into the building, and how are they good for us and good for the environment. So I kind of was just really thinking about it as a holistic project, and then obviously you want it to aesthetically look fantastic as well. So I think it was just about thinking about all of those things, and then trying to sort of, you know, get people to think about all of it, not just the energy efficiency.
Yeah, and I think part of that is just kind of hand-holding them through the process. A lot of people are starting to snap out of that mindset where they're thinking it's just a hippie house if it's sustainable. Like, people are understanding that it's, you know, beautifully, aesthetically thought out, and, you know, these refined details as well, which can increase performance. You know, one thing about increasing performance is we've learnt on the 10-star house and trying to demonstrate this indoor air quality. So you've also been looking at the types of materials that we've used in the home. Can you describe some of the strategies in terms of those internal finishes and why we have chosen to go down that path?
Yes. So there's quite a lot of factors when you're choosing a material. And, you know, a lot of the time, initially we would think about whether it is fit for purpose, it does what it needs to do, whether it's the insulation or the windows or the floor finish. Is it going to perform well in terms of maintenance as well as energy efficiency?
Yes.
But I also think that you need to consider the health of it. So some of our strategies was trying to choose things that were locally manufactured, and that's more about the health of the environment in terms of how many kilometres it's taken to get from where it's made to get to site. Also about the materials and what they're made of. So things with a lot of chemicals and ingredients generally and can not be good for us. And also choosing materials that already have an environmental logo or label, that someone's already done the research and they've told us that that ticks those boxes, so we can confidently specify that product. So they were some of the strategies that we used, and products like paints that didn't emit VOCs. Here.
There we go. So you did a fantastic webinar last week that was actually really engaging, but focusing on materials, and you certainly demonstrated that there's so many different labels that people can choose. How do you recommend people go about determining what sort of pathway they choose? Because it would be quite easy, I would imagine, for a client to say, "Oh, I want one, one of each. I want a label from each, or a star from each." But whether that's a good, efficient way of working, or should they focus just on one?
It's a good question. I think initially you need to start small, and perhaps, I would always talk about natural materials, because generally they are going to be the one, and timber always comes to mind. Not only is it sort of, it renews itself. So even though, if the forest is managed well, we can use all the timber, but then they can grow some more. So it is a renewable source. You do need to be careful about what varnishes and stains, etc., are on it, and glues and things that are used. But natural materials are the way to go. And in terms of the labelling, I think, you don't necessarily need to have one from every system, but there will be some that it doesn't particularly matter, although the labels are looking at different, some of them have different criteria, so it's good to understand what those criteria are. There are a lot of databases out there, if you have a bit of a search, that will collect different healthy materials. So that's a good way to start. And always, talk to the professionals or the people, experts in the field, and that can guide you along the way. But I would probably just start small, thinking about locally manufactured products, natural materials, so with recycled content. That could be a good way to go as well. So the Living Building Challenge is another sustainability framework like Green Star, and it looks at, again, holistic building in terms of the site, the energy, the water use, and one of those factors is materials. So the materials that had been selected, and then sort of leading the architects to other materials that would be better choice. Like everything in design, it's always good to implement all these things at the beginning. What you're looking at with the materials there is what they're made out of, where they come from, and whether they are emitting VOCs into the environment, both in the manufacture of the product and also after it's been installed. So things like paints, carpet, MDF furniture, or joinery, all of those things are emitting VOCs after they've been installed for quite a period afterwards. And you may not, it's not like a paint sometimes that you can smell, it's just something that's just has no smell, but you're breathing that in, which is not great. So in terms of the VOCs, that's generally about an internal space. So the product still may have VOCs as an external cladding or construction material, but generally if it's outside the building envelope, that can sort of dissipate into the environment, is my understanding. So not so important, or you don't need to worry about it so much on the external part of the building. But I think particularly if people do have those kind of issues of allergens or health issues, that if they know that at the time, it's best to flag that at the beginning and sort of say, look, you know, instead of saying, oh, well, we must have, you know, that's a usual product in a building. I guess I can't even say anything. They should mention it, because I think that there are ways around it, and then you can focus on that so that that product is not in there. And another one to think about is the waste, construction waste on site. You know, you always go past a building site and there's a big skip full of stuff that just looks like it's perfectly fine, or it's a huge half a sheet of plasterboard or something. You think surely they could have used that a bit better, but I guess the quickest and easiest thing is for the tradies to throw it away. But if we can be smarter about the products we use, and, you know, cutting things on site and the sizes that are more related to the size of the panels, that's also helps to reduce the waste. And carbon neutral definitely is a good way to go as well.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point that you've made, because you know, not that we want to dictate design by panel size and things like that, but in terms of sustainability strategies, you know, at least having an understanding of that as a designer is probably important, so we have less waste. The other big thing in terms of sustainability is insulation. So there's so many different types of insulation. So maybe doing that research as well is quite important, about having, you know, an earth wall or something instead of another product.
Yeah, because that's right. That product that we did use in the 10-star house had less formaldehydes or no formaldehyde in it. So that also means it's safer for the people installing it. So it's not just the end user, it's about the builder on site. If he's dealing with some sort of product that he's breathing in the filaments and stuff, and he's doing that on a daily basis for years and years and years, if you can choose a material that doesn't do that, that's just better for everybody.
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it? It just takes it to that next level, and, you know, responsibility or considering others. Yeah. In terms of international sort of strategies in terms of sustainability, Living Building Challenge and so forth, what role do you think that those in Australia, also Passive House, what role do you think that those are playing in Australia in terms of transitioning us to a more sustainable built environment? They are becoming more prevalent, people are understanding it a bit more. Do you think that it's because essentially the world's getting smaller because the communication is getting better? Is it, you know, the challenge of trying to achieve those international standards?
Yeah, I think they definitely are getting more exposure, and people are becoming more familiar with them. And it's good that they are reaching sort of international levels. Of course, there is things in there that have to adjust to make it more, some of the standards or criteria need to be made to suit the local conditions. But I just think you've got to keep lifting the benchmark. I mean, Green Star 10, 15 years ago was a really high standard to reach. And, you know, everyone's like, oh, we're not going to be able to do it, we're not going to be able to do it. And the same for the 6-star energy efficiency, you know, oh, that's so hard. And then they were talking about possibly in the next few years the building code lifting 7 stars. So we can get there. It's just that people are always kind of, it seems too unachievable at the time. But I think if you really kind of work at it, you can do that. And I think you have to keep lifting those benchmarks so that we have something to aspire to, and we need to, because
so far behind.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah.
Things will change. So what advice do you give people wanting to have a sustainable lifestyle, so maybe homeowners and so forth, and, you know, how they can aim beyond the star ratings and into a healthy indoor environment? How involved do you think that they need to be?
Well, of course, if they're building a house, then they can be involved along the way with their consultant in terms of selections. Are you meaning just within their day-to-day life?
Or say they go out and they are wanting to build a home, they go to a volume builder and they want a sustainable home. They're not sure if they can get it. Like how much questioning can they give their builders?
Yeah.
Like what sort of things can they ask and so forth?
Well, I think they need to ask those questions. Definitely with my research for the Living Building Challenge, I was asking questions of suppliers that they'd never been asked before. So, you know, they're supposed to be the expert on their material, and I'd be asking them, like sometimes they didn't know where it was made, or if it was an electronic piece of equipment that's made up of a number of different parts that come from different parts of the world. They were like, oh, well, I don't know where the switch comes from, or I don't know whether the plastic casing comes from, or I don't know whether we've got the information for that. So you need to, I think you just need to be the squeaky wheel. In some terms, you've got to keep asking, and if they keep getting those same questions from customers or owners or builders, they're going to think, oh, hang on a minute. One, they should know it. They should do the research themselves and be familiar with their product, and kind of understand why these people are asking these questions. Why do they want to know where it comes from? You know, sometimes some of the suppliers were like, well, why does it matter where it comes from? Because they weren't even understanding that there was a carbon footprint in that. So I think that homeowners definitely should ask that of their builders or their salespeople to understand what it is they want to know. Definitely.
Yeah, and like in terms of the VOCs and maybe paint or types of plasterboard, you know, and you know maybe they're getting heated up inside of the building when the building is closed up. Maybe it's important for them to ask those questions and ask for that substitute, just so that they're looking after their investment in their house and not making themselves sick.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today, Carmen. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. And hopefully we'll all be face to face again soon. So thank you very much for joining us for this interview, and Carmen. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and then we'll endeavour to answer them at another time. You can also email us. I've put that email address in the chat box as well. This webinar is eligible for 1 formal Green Star point, so please email us and we can give you the proof of attendance. So we might ask you some questions from the webinar if you haven't participated in the chat. But thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.